The Daily Code Snippet. In today's video, we will focus on turning the navigation unordered list into a typical navigation bar. We also want to add some basic styling to our page so that our header works better with the rest of the content. So here we have our demo code page from yesterday, and what we're going to work on today is fleshing out the navigation. So if we look at our demo code page, you see that we have this navigation here. This is an unstyled, unordered list, and we want to make it look more like a navigation with actual buttons. So we are going to add a little bit of styling. I know we haven't really gone over the CSS, but we're going to show you some basic things. And so our navigation, we realized from yesterday that we forgot to put in our unordered list surrounding our list elements, so I'm going to put that in. And in order to add some styling, we're going to add it embedded in our head rather than adding a style.css that we're going to load in. We're just going to embed it directly into the head, and we use the style element for that. Because we're keeping it simple, it's fine that it's just embedded in this one single page. So we'll add navigation as a comment just to keep ourselves organized, so we can always look for the styling that's directed our navigation in one spot. And we're going to target our list elements, and we want to remove that automatic bullet. And so what we're going to do is put in a command, list style type equals none. Save that. So I'm hitting the keyboard shortcut Command S to save my document. And then when I go to the browser and I hit Command R, which is to refresh the page, it's going to take in the new code that we just added. And we see that the list style type, the bullet, has now been removed. And then we want now the elements, rather than being listed down in a column, we want to make it each button across. And so in order to do that, we're going to have it float. And so float just means that it's being taken out of normal positioning, and it's going to float to the left. So each element in that list is going to float towards the left of the item before it. So if we add this command and we look at what happens on screen, you can see that now instead of going section 1, section 2, section 3, one below each other, they now move to the right, and they're floating against the previous element. So the section 3 is floating against section 2, is floating against section 1. We also see that section 1 from our content is also floating. And why is that happening? Well, because all elements will start to float until you tell them to stop floating. And so we want to go to look at the next element that we don't want to float anymore, and that would be the main. And we're going to tell it to stop floating. And so we're going to add that. And we're going to tell it to stop floating. So the command to stop floating is clear both, because you can either float left or you can float right. And what we want to clear is any floating left or right. So clear both. That's why that command is that. And when we hit return, we see that it stops. The floating stops at this point where the main starts. So we still have these items kind of next to each other and kind of abutting one another, and we don't really like that. So we want to add a little bit of space between each element, and we'll do a margin right of 20 pixels. So remember, with if you just put margin, then you're going to have to specify. This is going to say all around, top, bottom, left, and right is 20 pixels. So if we only want there to be margin on the right side, we have to tell it that. And so once I save and refresh, so now there's a little bit of spacing between each of these. And we do note that there's this gap here, and that is coming from our UL element. And we just want to tell it to remove all the space around it. So we'll remove all the padding, and then that should have it no longer kind of floating there to to the side. So now they're all abutted to the side. They're floating next to one another. And what we also might want to do is remove the underline on the links. And so that the links are the A element. So now we want to kind of target our link element. And so in order to remove that underlining, we go to remove the text decoration. And so text decoration, none. And in order to make this look more like a button, we want to add some spacing around each of these elements. So we're going to do, this is sort of a standard spacing, and then we might want to give it a background color. So it looks like a button, and we're going to just give it a gray color, a light gray color. And you can see now that it has that spacing. And the text looks a little hard to read. We're going to make the color white against the gray background. So now we have that. And now when buttons, sometimes you want to have an indication that you're hovering over a particular element, that something changes so that you know what you're selecting. And so in order to do that, we add a little hover command to our link. So a hover. And we're going to make the background color black. And these are basically shortened hexadecimal codes. So when the number is the same, 999, it's actually 999. Hexadecimal codes are 6 letters and numbers that indicate a particular color. I know this to be a light gray, 999, 999. And when you have something that's the same number or letter across, then you can all shorten it. So FFF is white, and 000 is black, or 000000, and FFFFFF. These are things that, you know, as you code, you'll memorize certain colors, something that you can use quickly. So now we see that whenever we hover, it's going to turn black. And then there are other A states. We won't kind of get into those, but there's, you know, what color should it change to if you're actually selected it, or if it's already been visited. Sometimes a user may want to know that they've already went to a particular link, so you may want to have a visited color. We'll kind of go into that more in depth when we're really going into the styling of link elements. Like I said, this is sort of meant to be a quick page that you can use to sample code, and we're not going to be very complicated with it. But looking at our page, you can see there's kind of like everything is scrunched together. So we kind of want to add some spacing. This is our header, so we may want to give the header like a fixed height. I would say maybe about 150, 200 pixels. And that way there's some space, and each section, like I said, we're going to give it a fixed height as well, so that, you know, when you click these buttons, it's actually moving you somewhere, as opposed to having them all scrunched together like that. So what I'm going to do is put in a little bit of a header style. I'm going to fix the height, like we said, to maybe like 150 pixels. And that kind of pushes that down a little bit. And I'm going to make each section maybe 500 pixels in height. And this is while we're kind of making this up as we go along. And once we have actual content, then we won't need to artificially create the height of our sections because the content will have the actual height based on the content that's there. But if we go back and take a look at how our page is shaping up, we see that now we have sections that are 500 pixels in height. We have a header that's about 150. If we hit the buttons, then now, because some of the sections are scrolling below, we will jump to that section. But you may wonder, well, why did I add this giant gap of 200 pixels? And then this is why. It's because what I really want to do is I want to have our header to be fixed at the top of the page. And positioning is something that's a bit of a advanced topic, but I'm going to kind of show it to you here. And so we added that 200 pixels to give it enough space so that there's a little bit of a space between the maximum height of the header and then the beginning of the first section. So that's why there's that little bit of a 50 pixel gap there. And by fixing the positioning to the top, that means that the header will stay in place at the top of the page while the things scroll behind it. And you can kind of see that you can see it show through. So what we may want to do is also add a background color. And that way, it'll kind of disappear behind that header. Now we see that you can kind of see at the top, and that's because there's usually a little bit of a gap until you make sure that you have no margin or padding around all your elements. And the other thing we want to do with our page is we don't usually want it to go span the entire width of the browser. So typically you want to do something like 80%. So we're going to add it to the body so that everything is included. And then by adding margin 0 auto, what we're saying is that we don't want any top or bottom space. So we want it really to be the top of the page, no gaps. And then auto, when placed in that left-right position, will tell the browser that we want it to automatically calculate the space on the left and the right so that the content is centered on the page. So that's how you center things on the page. I hit a key by mistake. So now we see things kind of shifted to the right so that they're now centered. And when things are scrolled behind, there's no more gap at the top because we've made sure there's no space between the header and the top of the page. So now everything is ready. We can use the navigation to go to each section. Once we put content there, we can jump to it directly using our navigation. We have our header fixed, so that means that we always have our navigation available to us, no matter where we are on the page, to move about. Presented by Designers Learn Code.